Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Science of SaaS Startups podcast. Today, I'm talking to Chris Calkin. Chris is the VP of Worldwide Sales at CircleCI, and they're the world's largest shared CI/CD platform. Chris, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Happy to be here.
So I just want to kick things off by asking you a few quick questions just to help the audience get to know you a little bit. So the first one, if you could go for a beer with any celebrity, dead or alive, who would you choose?
Interesting first question. I actually had a chance to have a beer with Mark Cuban in Oxford, more than one beer actually, which was very interesting just to hear someone like him thinking about the future of business, the future of technology, and kind of how the two are interlaid. Beyond that, who would I go get a beer with? Right now, I'm very into the Tour de France, so I'm thinking about Primož Roglič, who just crashed out of the Tour de France. I would like to go get a beer with him.
He probably needs a beer right now, I think.
Yeah. He does need a beer. He definitely needs a beer.
So obviously your background has been primarily in sales and marketing before that. What job do you think you would be least suited for?
Least suited for, interesting. Having led a sales team that's selling to DevOps leaders and DevOps engineers, I can tell you that I'm not suited for that role. That role takes it takes a massive amount of expertise and knowledge that, as much as I understand it from a business value standpoint, I'm never going to, and my salespeople are never going to understand certain things the way that, someone that has a master's in computer science from MIT and 20 years experience scaling DevOps at an enterprise does. Certainly not a role I am qualified for, although a role that is very interesting for me.
Yeah, I guess there's a big learning curve there, which is always keeps you on your toes. Yeah. What book has impacted you more than any other?
Does Harry Potter count?
Yeah, you can say Harry Potter. Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
No, I'm a big time reader, and I do actually love fantasy. I still read a ton of fantasy in between business books. I would say the two business books that have been most impactful for me, more recently, maybe a year ago, I read The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Okay, I don't know that.
Great book. So you probably heard of Andreessen Horowitz or A16Z, the venture capital firm. So it's by Ben Horowitz, and it's just about kind of running through his experience and what led him to where he is today. And it talks about the different challenges that he faced and what he'd advise people to do in the future, and just made me think about a lot of the situations that I've been in historically, that I'm in at CircleCI, and how to face those challenges. And so super helpful there. And then I would say a business book that everyone should read if they haven't read it, and probably reread, is How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I think most folks have, and it's just such basic, obvious stuff. And at the same time, it's things that I think we need to be reminded about day after day, basic things like smiling, using people's names, not always calling out people for being wrong, things that you go, that's really logical. Sometimes you just need to read it to reflect back on yourself. Hopefully those are two recommendations that I think most people would get behind if they've read those books.
Yeah, I think I was given that on the kind of week one of my career, straight out of university. It was like, read this book. And, I think that those old books never get old, do they really? So,
they don't,
well, thank you for that. And I hope that's given everybody a bit more of a sense of kind of you as a person. So if we jump into CircleCI now, so do you want to just kick things off by giving us an overview of the company and what you're trying to do?
Sure. So CircleCI helps developers go from idea to delivery, kind of at the speed of their imagination. And what that really means is we automate the build, test, and deploy process of software. So if you think about the change of software development from, say, the 90s, it's now very iterative. It's across a variety of platforms, across a variety of pieces of hardware. You have software that's being delivered to cars and refrigerators now, and it's very different than it was before. And so if you had to manually take time to test every single specific situation that might occur, whether it's on a device or a specific situation, you can imagine not only the delays that you'd have, but the hesitancy you would have to go to market with those feature updates. And so we completely erased that by automating that process. So company-wise, just kind of stats, we're roughly 600 employees. We have 5 kind of primary hubs across San Francisco, our headquarters, Denver, where I'm based, Boston, London, and Tokyo. Although we have a very global organization. We have folks really across the world in all of our departments. As far as kind of what we're trying to do, our mission as an organization is to be kind of the de facto continuous integration and delivery standard. So there's a lot of other organizations in the market that are kind of trying to do like soup to nuts DevOps, which, I think that there is a business model for kind of the peanut butter approach where you're trying to kind of go across everything. And then there's a business model for the best of breed. And we are very much so the best of breed technology, and that is very much so our value proposition. And we believe that continuous integration, delivery, and deployment is not only important enough to have one solution, but it's the most important part of the software delivery lifecycle. And so that's where you see like our acquisition of Vamp, which is a continuous deployment and validation provider out of Amsterdam that we just acquired recently. And we'll obviously be looking to layer in their technology with ours. Does that answer your question, Ben?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit in your answer, but obviously in this market, there's some very, very big names, people like GitLab and Google and Microsoft and AWS. And I guess, you were kind of touching on it there being, a kind of peanut butter provider versus like a best in breed provider. But I just wondered, like competing with brand names like that, does that change anything in terms of the way that you need to go to market and approach things?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined CircleCI, our biggest competitor was an open source technology called Jenkins. And Jenkins has ultimately been around since 2000. And Jenkins is probably still our #1 kind of incumbent competitor. It's usually we're going in and actually replacing Jenkins. The kind of primary competitor that we were going to market against, against Jenkins during when I first joined was TravisCI, which was another startup that was based out of Berlin, also very popular with open source developers. And today they have kind of continued to find their niche. They still have a core group of customers, but haven't really grown in a few years. And so instead, what you've seen is the advent of companies like GitLab getting more into CI, and then companies like Microsoft acquiring GitHub, obviously a few years ago for $7.5 billion, and then GitHub releasing GitHub Actions, which is a competitive product on continuous integration and delivery. AWS has tons and tons of products that can help out with a variety of things, as does Google. The way things have changed now is that there are organizations that always understood how important CI/CD was. And those organizations are still looking to buy CircleCI, right? They still go, yep, we want the best of breed technology because we know how important this is to our business. What our business has to do now and is working on continuing to do is educating the rest of the market on why it's important to invest in best of breed versus just kind of go with your existing provider for, all of your other things, your all-in-one solution as it is. And that's, that's a challenge. That's not something that is going to, just happen out of the gate for everyone. They might be like, well, I've got this big contract with Microsoft or Amazon, et cetera. And, I would just want to take advantage of that. And it goes, yeah, I understand that short-term friction that you don't want to deal with, but you're going to have much deeper long-term friction if you don't. And that said, the other thing about the DevOps industry is that all of these organizations are our partners, right? We work very, very closely with GitHub. We work very, very, very closely with AWS as well as GCP. And so, you know, it's ultimately a space where there is considerable overlap, and it's just about working with the market to not only ensure we have the best solution for a variety of different needs, but also that the market understands why the need is so important.
And I guess obviously with such a quickly growing market as well, there's room for you all to kind of grow within that as well. Yeah, I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about the relationship between speed and change management, because obviously there's a massive pressure on development teams to move quickly, and that's probably never been greater and is only going to increase in the future. But at the same time, you know, we've got software becoming more and more complex, like development teams being more and more complex and distributed across the world and more interconnected. So how does a company manage those two seemingly kind of conflicting requirements, you know, to be moving quickly, but also on top of all the changes that you're making at the same time?
Honestly, it's a really good question. And if you check out the CircleCI State of Software Delivery reports, it's something that we dive into pretty heavily. Obviously, it has a lot to do with the setup of your build, test, deploy processes and the quality of your testing. If you have really accessible systems like a CircleCI, like a GitHub, where a developer can easily access their code, they can easily access the build system, they can test for everything that they need to test for, and then they can deliver software, like I said, kind of at the speed of their imagination. So we're not talking about a timeline where they're waiting for a day or even hours for results. Maybe they're waiting minutes. And that's something that can be accomplished only through a very, very sophisticated tool set. It's not all about tool set, though, obviously. You talked about teams being distributed, and we've seen that even at CircleCI as we've scaled to about 600 people. How your teams are formed, how your teams are organized, where work is distributed, where work isn't distributed. These are all important decisions that teams have to make in terms of when they're collaborating, how they're collaborating. And it's worked well for us because that's kind of where we originated. But I think it's tougher for companies that went from, okay, yeah, everyone was in one central location. We had this release schedule. We had operators approve everything. Disrupting that and changing that can be uncomfortable. And it really can only happen through organizing teams correctly, which will depend on your business. It could be based off of the platform they're delivering to, could be the specific software that they're delivering, or it could be location. There's a variety of different ways to organize teams, but that is another kind of core component beyond just the software and the setup of the software that they have.
Yeah, okay. I mean, the DevOps market in general is receiving like a huge focus for investment companies right now. I think, you know, it would only be behind cybersecurity in terms of where the kind of investment is going. Where do you see this industry evolving, like in the coming years? Like what are the trends you're kind of seeing, which you think will develop in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
It's a good question. First of all, I think that you mentioned cybersecurity. Security will continue to get interlaid with all of these processes. And if you look at companies like Sneak, that are doing really cool things on the DevOps side from a security standpoint, I see that, you know, see their value growing as well. So the reality of what CircleCI does is we help kind of mitigate a lot of those manual processes that you would have had before. One of the differentiators of CircleCI is referred to in kind of a small feature. It's automated test splitting, where basically if you run your build process once, we'll look at that process and then we'll automatically optimize it for you. So we might take a process that took an hour and cut it down into 10 minutes, and we'll do that automatically. But what we won't do is we won't necessarily recommend all of these different changes that you could conceivably make to your code to make that run into 5 minutes. And that's something that we're working on now. And then I think the next step beyond that is actually just making those changes automatically. You're having companies kind of opt into those changes. And we think about, machine learning and AI getting into the DevOps space. That's really what I see kind of happening, and what I see as the differentiator. We've started by automating this process, but it's all through config as code. What we can go further with is leveraging the data and insights that we have to get companies to all a best of breed standard, where they're all getting kind of constant iterations and updates and improvements. And that I see happening across the DevOps industry. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, great. Well, let's dig in a little bit to talk about the startup life. I mean, you've raised kind of $315 million so far, and recently closed a Series F in May. I wanted to just kind of wind back to when you joined the company. I think at that point that they were kind of at Series B stage back in 2017. And how, how's the company changed from what you walked into in 2017 to where you are now? Has the culture evolved, or is it the same company that you joined then?
Culture has absolutely evolved. So just to give you a picture kind of for the scale that, my job has changed. When I joined CircleCI, I had 4 account executives all based out of San Francisco. And that was, who I was working with. And now, the sales team is quickly approaching 100 people across, those 5 hubs, but globally. And realistically, we expect that to continue to grow at that rate or even a faster rate. So obviously things have had to change from just from an organizational standpoint. And I think you have some level of cultural change when that happens, right? Early on, tribal knowledge can be an advantage. It can be something that helps you move quickly without having to constantly reference existing documentation and processes. When you're at our scale today, tribal knowledge can be a big challenge because someone might leave the organization or move into a different position, and all of a sudden you have 10 people kind of relying on this data and this information that don't have it. So we've had to build out new processes for things like onboarding, for things like continuous training, to make sure that teams actually understand things. And that means going through a little bit of a different process than maybe someone who joined the organization 3 years ago did. Personally, I think a better process and a better situation. The other thing that evolved at CircleCI was the company very much so started as purely product driven company. The company actually acquired Distiller, which was the company founded by Rob Zuber and Jim Rose, who are our CTO and CEO respectively today. And so at the time, Jim was the only non-engineer at the company. And so if you think about the evolution of the company, it was a very, very engineering heavy culture. And that obviously we've wanted to persist as we are a DevOps software, but we've also wanted to ensure that our engineers are also in communication with the market, and our go-to-market function is in communication with our engineers. So getting those two groups, that go-to-market function and the R&D function, really, really strongly aligned is something that has taken time. And where we are today, and really a lot of the success we had in the year before COVID and even during COVID, I think was due to our cohesion there. So definitely some changes. Not all of them are always super fun. Growing up as a company, you do have to do kind of different things from I better put together my second half of year planning now. But most of them have been very, very positive.
And as a leader, do you find yourself learning new skill sets then? Because I guess when you're joining and you've got 4 sales guys, your job is very different to what it is now. So are you learning all these things for the first time?
Yes, and that's why I love it, right?
Pushing yourself.
I think that, when I first joined, it was building processes, and there was no onboarding. I joined and I was supposed to coach account executives on how to sell continuous integration delivery, and I didn't understand it. And so I was like, this is something we need to rectify, and this is an important thing. Because for me, I believe that successful salespeople and really go-to-market function is a confident go-to-market function, and confidence comes through knowledge. And so it's something I focused a lot on early on. So over time, obviously, as we've hired, and for some years, I felt like 60% of my job was hiring and ensuring we had the right folks on board. It's been about building out that scale, building out our onboarding function, which is now run by a great team of enablement folks, building out our quota and compensation models. These things, they had to change throughout my time here. And the way that I'm building them now, of course, it's different than it was when we were 100 employees. But I'm sure it'll be different next year as well. So there will be challenges that I haven't faced yet, and we'll continue to face, and that's what's exciting.
And as you grow internationally, how do you try and maintain that culture that made you successful in the US market, and then you're growing in new regions, with different cultures? How do you keep the kind of company culture?
So obviously I mentioned hiring, and hiring is huge. And that, for me, goes through kind of going into each interview process with some very clear objective criteria. My first one is curiosity. I'm looking for folks that not only have the ability to learn, but really want to learn. Not only is our technology very complex, our space is complex, and it's constantly changing. And so you need to have that curiosity in order to be successful here. I also, though, try to spend a lot of time kind of within all our hubs and with all of our people directly. So I obviously started in San Francisco. I'm currently based in Denver, as I moved out here to open the office, and then ultimately decided to stay. I used to spend a lot of time in the UK prior to, I was actually there in February of 2020, right up until I had to.
You ran away.
Yeah, exactly. And spent time with our team there to kind of understand their backgrounds and what they were going to input into the culture. I call myself feedback driven in the sense that I have a perspective, but I want every single person on the sales organization, and ideally in the company, to be contributing something. Hey, this process could be improved, this messaging could change. Because ultimately I think that's what I personally have liked. And that's really, for me, the only way the organization gets better. That might even be from a brand new SDR, just looking at a process through a different lens and seeing, this doesn't seem right. Because often it isn't. And at my level, I wouldn't see that if they didn't bring it to me. So those are some of the things that I do to try to retain the culture as we grow. And then obviously we do things like sales kickoffs, presidents clubs, et cetera, where we make sure we can get together and share ideas as well.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of mentioned a couple of the kind of soft skills that you look for, like when you hire someone, and you kind of briefly touched on it previously when you were kind of intimating that your previous company that you worked with was more in the kind of MarTech space. I mean, how much do you see kind of previous experience of working in an industry as being critical, or do you see curiosity and that cultural fit as being the key piece?
It's a great question. I think very, very relevant for a company that has as complex of technology as CircleCI. The reality is that having technical acumen to start is a huge leg up. It definitely helps. That said, I've had folks that are from totally unrelated industries that have wound up to be some of my most successful people. And that's why I think it is about that curiosity, that work ethic, that ability to learn. If they have kind of at least those three things, of course, there's other traits that I would look for as well, then they can be successful in learning our technology and ultimately kind of get ahead of where someone else might be. I've also hired folks from not necessarily competitors, but folks in our space that have had a harder time getting ramped up. So they came in with some of that technical acumen, but didn't necessarily have that curiosity. And so I do think while having technical acumen is a huge leg up and really helpful, it's not everything. And I would say that for anyone in their career. The reality is, even if we've been there before, there's nothing that is exactly the same about any of the situations. When we were 380 employees and my previous company was 380 employees, vastly different challenges that we were facing. And so while my experience prior was helpful, it didn't give me the answers. And so I think that while experience is useful, certainly not to be not to be taken for granted. It can also it can be a crutch for folks that don't continuously want to learn.
Yeah. Okay. So you would place those soft skills as being more important than some of the kind of CV type skills, if you like.
I would. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So final question. I was just interested because obviously you've been with two like very, very rapidly growing companies in your career. And I think in any kind of company that has that steeper growth path, there's going to be a very steep learning path that goes along with that as well. And I just wanted to kind of ask about the role that mentors have played in your career development so far. Like, is a good mentor something that you've actively seeked out, or have you just kind of, learning from your own mistakes, or, what's your approach?
So I absolutely did with CircleCI, and that was one of the primary reasons I joined the company. It was to work with Jane Kim, who's our current CRO. So she kind of within the organization was someone that I knew I could learn a lot from, but that would also let me have the autonomy to run the business as I needed to, and sometimes learn from mistakes rather than preventing me from making all of those mistakes. So that was really huge. Prior to that, I kind of stumbled on mentors, people that I would just meet and then glean a lot of value from in different aspects of life and business. I do think that mentors are hard to create. It's hard to go out and be like, you're going to be my mentor.
Yeah.
I think people try to do that when they see people with certain titles, and that, that's certainly valuable to pick those people's brains, no doubt. The people I found ended up being very successful in their career, but some of them were, maybe just an account executive when I was an early stage account executive, right? And then they grew on to be, CROs and CEOs of companies. And it's more through just having interactions with a variety of people. I think you get the benefit of finding who would be your true mentor, and each person is going to be different in terms of, the people that really speak to them. Hopefully that.
And I guess going back to that point that you mentioned earlier about curiosity again, isn't it? If you meet anyone, it doesn't matter what title they have. If you're interested in what they're doing and asking them questions, that person can be a mentor.
100%. Absolutely. And that was one of the coolest things. And one of the reasons I did my MBA was I was inundated in the technology market in the Bay Area. Everyone you speak to is technology. That's awesome in a lot of ways. And then going to Oxford and then doing a negotiation class with a Norwegian doctor, like those types of conversation just gave me a whole different lens that I didn't get to experience before, and it was incredibly valuable. It's something I think that everyone should do. Just go get those diverse perspectives, go get those alternative opinions, because you're going to learn a lot more from them than you will, people that have the exact same perspectives as you.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, it's been really great having you on today, Chris, and thank you for joining us. If people want to discuss CircleCI, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah. Obviously you can reach out on our website. You can also just reach out to me. It's just chris.calkin@circleci.com. Happy to obviously chat about CircleCI or kind of anything that's discussed in this podcast. But yeah, Ben, I really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully this is useful for everybody.
Yeah, great stuff. And I really look forward to kind of watching the next stage of your growth.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Okay. Cheers. Bye.